Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin Dooley. I am speaking to you from the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, where I'm a journalist in residence. I'm joined today by Mr. Ujjal Dosanjh, the former Premier of British Columbia and also Minister of Health. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Good to be with you.
Excellent. This week has seen a lot of international news, some very unfortunate international news coming out of Southeast Asia, namely the what has been called the textbook case of genocide and ethnic cleansing by the head of UNHCR, and also has been marked by Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto leader of that country, and Nobel laureates. What has been seen as a lack of action on her part. You have been very boisterous in your condemnation of Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi, and have recently written calling for her honorary Canadian citizenship to be revoked. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of input as to why you feel so strongly about this, and what you think the revocation of her honorary citizenship can achieve.
Well, I don't know whether it will achieve something. It would certainly send a message that the Canadian citizenship, honorary Canadian citizenship, means something in the end. It shouldn't simply be left bestowed upon someone who refuses to say anything in condemnation of the worst possible atrocities that Myanmar has seen for some time. This has been going on for some time, for about 2 or 3 years. There has been a selective burning of several villages over time, people being killed, women being raped, exodus continuing into Bangladesh, into India of Muslims, Rohingya Muslims. And in the population of several million, there's only about 1 million, just over 1 million Muslims. And they're being targeted by the army and egged on and encouraged by, of all people, the Buddhist monks, who we usually see as symbols of peace and nonviolence. And the Nobel laureate has been absolutely silent. I just read a line, if I can paraphrase it, from Bishop Tutu in his most recent public letter to Aung San Suu Kyi, where he in fact admonishes her, saying, if silence is the price of your ascension to power, the price, unfortunately, is too high. And I think that is really the issue at the heart of this. It is not whether you like or dislike Aung San Suu Kyi. She's been the darling of peaceniks all over the world and people who love human rights. And now she is the target of their criticism, and legitimately so, for her own ongoing silence. And I believe that she should speak up. People, when they're honored for standing up to tyranny, for peace and for harmony, they have an ongoing obligation. They are now the leaders of the world, in the world, and they have an ongoing obligation to continue to speak up on these issues, whether or not they hit close to home. In fact, the real test of whether or not the real test of one's commitment to these universal principles comes when your near and dear ones are involved in either, in actually perpetrating them, the violence and fear upon people, and in that particular test, she has failed.
You're someone who has followed this situation very closely for a long time. Was there the condemnations have come out from corners such as former Nobel laureates like Mr. Tutu, yes, and also Malala Yousafzai. In fact, I think even the president of Iran has called it a genocide recently at the UN General Assembly. As somebody who's followed this very closely, was there ever any indication on the part of Aung San Suu Kyi that you saw over the years that perhaps maybe her vision of a democratic integrated state in Burma, perhaps that definition didn't include the Rohingya?
Well, I never thought about it when she was actually fighting the tyrannical generals. I never thought about whether or not, her openness and the embrace of her democratic ideals would extend to include the Rohingya, because one simply assumed that when she was speaking on behalf of the Burmese or the Myanmar people, she was speaking on behalf of all of them. And it is only when the atrocities started, and they've been going on for some time, and she has totally failed to stand up and speak for the Rohingya and try and educate the rest of the Burmese population that they are part of the Myanmar population, they're part of the Burmese reality, and they should be included in a peaceful reconstruction of the country under a democratic government. And she has totally failed to include them in her endeavors, and she has failed to condemn the violence. And as I said, from my perspective, it is easy to stand up and speak against something that everyone disagrees with, but it is more difficult to stand up and speak against what I call one's own people if they are the perpetrators of the atrocities, the cruelties, and ethnic cleansing. And in this case, the generals, with vast majority of the Myanmar people supporting them, are carrying out ethnic cleansing, and only the strong and the really committed people really stand up against these situations, because otherwise, if the whole population of the country is for one thing and you stand up for the other thing, which is peace and inclusion, you can be easily isolated and excommunicated. The test is like Mahatma Gandhi in 1947, when India partitioned. In the northeast of India, in Bengal, Muslims were being butchered like nothing ever before. And he walked barefoot into the territory by himself with a couple of helpers and aides, and tried to calm the situation, not fearing any violence or worrying about what the Hindus of India might say. And in fact, it was those kinds of courageous of Mahatma Gandhi that led to his killing by the right-wing forces in India at that time. And so, that is when you really test someone's mettle, someone's commitment to these universal principles. And in the wake of what she has done or not done by her actions and omissions, she has turned out to be essentially a vacuous leader without any principles whatsoever.
Now, some defenders of hers would say, well, vacuous leader, but she is in the midst of having to deal with essentially her former jailers, which sort of also de facto run the country. You have said that what you've labeled as the apologists for Aung San Suu Kyi's inaction, that those words ring very, very hollow. Why do those ring very? If she were to say, speak up, what do you think she would lose leverage that she already has with the military junta, or is this really complacency or perhaps a wish of hers in your view? What do you think she's thinking?
Well, I don't believe that she in her heart believes the killing of Rohingya is justified. I'm willing to grant her that, But the fact that she hasn't spoken out tells me that it's not very important for her. What is more important for her is to be part of the government no matter what. And when you actually come to that conclusion and behave in that fashion, you really have no principles. You've already sold out. What's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is the jailers, her former jailers, will put her back in jail again. Well, so what? You know, like what good is she doing staying out of jail? She's actually complicit in their murderous activities in Myanmar today. So she has a choice to make. And the choice is speak up or you are now a complicit murderer.
She has actually used the term fake news when it comes to what's going on there as far as satellite photography of the area. She's also said recently that the quote unquote scrutiny doesn't bother her. Do you think that she believes that this is survivable given the interplay of geopolitics in the area?
Well, I think she believes that she's going to survive this, but she also knows that she'll survive it much diminished. She would simply become an accessory to the murderers, the generals. She's become the perfect dictator's handmaid, if I can use the recently popular word, through Margaret Atwood. I mean, she has become the perfect dictator's handmaid. And she is the weapon of peace that they are using to hide their terrible violence that they are perpetrating on the soil of Myanmar, and it's just not acceptable. I can't say any more. I mean, what can you say?
Canada does have some linkages with Myanmar, but we hardly have the relationship that we do, that Myanmar has with, say, a Russia or in India or a China. Is there anything that Canada can and should be doing more than, say, a revocation of a citizenship?
Well, I think Canada can do perhaps much more. Speak up in the United Nations on this issue. Try and create world opinion. But the first thing Canada has to do, it has to rescind what is now its complicit acquiescence in the violence in India by continuing to allow to remain in place the honor Canada once bestowed upon it. The continuance of that honor, the bestowal of that honor is an insult to the kind of violence that is going on in Myanmar. I just think that that's if there's nothing else Canada can do, Canada can stand up and say, we will not allow the abuse and the insult to our honorary citizenship.
Should Canada be making further commitments as far as a vociferous, say, helping out with the refugee camps that are burgeoning in Bangladesh? Foreign Minister Freeland recently made a speech this past year about Canada having a much more vociferous input on the world stage. I know that there was recent talks about Canada spending some funds on a mission to Mali. Should this be a top priority for Canada? Do you think?
Well, you know, I don't think that when you do humanitarian missions, you think about your strategic interests. Those two things don't always go together. If Canada believes that it's a voice of peace and a force for peace and good in the world, then Canada has to be wherever it can be. And Rohingya, you know, one third of Rohingya, one-third population of Rohingya have already been thrown out of Bangladesh. There's been an exodus of over 400,000 Rohingya out of about 1.3 million total population of Rohingya in Burma, and I just think that that is ethnic cleansing. If you reduce the population by a third, and you might end up reducing it by half or expelling all of them by force, that is absolute ethnic cleansing. And if Canada isn't going to stand up on something like this, then all of the words we use to praise ourselves and feel good about ourselves are, you know, if I can use this again, are vacuous, are empty. These are just empty words.
Well, that's certainly a lot to think about. And again, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for your outspokenness. It's very much appreciated.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.